So, speaking of utility commissions desperately needing resource on their podium, I'd like to call to the stage Alan Rivaldo, who is a cybersecurity analyst for the Public Utility Commission of Texas, Christopher Villarreal, regulatory analyst for the California Public Utility Commission. That's my utility commission, by the way. And, of course, Craig Miller, who's the project manager for the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association, who's not really part of a state PUC, but should be part of this anyways, because acting in a similar capacity, I guess, would be the best way to put it. And, of course, moderating for this, we have the venerable Chris Cotting of Think Smart Grid. Chris, take it away.
Well, gentlemen, policy at the state level, harmonizing federal and state PUC guidelines. It's rather a large chunk to try to handle in 45 minutes, but we'll give it a crack. As organizations that are tasked with regulating utilities, what are the biggest challenges that you're facing in terms of dealing with smart grid security?
So I'll start.
Disclaimer.
Disclaimer. Yes, disclaimer. Disclaimer is these opinions are my own and not those of the Commission. That being said, I will tell you what the Commission has done in regards to cybersecurity. Last June, the Commission issued a decision directing certain requirements for a smart grid deployment plan. One of the requirements was the inclusion of a grid and cybersecurity strategy. The strategy should be based on guidance documents, including the NISTR, although it was issued before the NISTR was finalized, with a risk assessment, and well as information about audits. We did not require those audits to be filed, but we required them that they be made available to Commission staff upon request. So we are taking an active step in addressing cybersecurity from the state level. So one of the issues that we're having right now is, as was addressed in the previous panel, is where does the regulation of the distribution grid come from in the absence of directives from the federal government? And our PUC is taking a little bit more active role in ensuring that our utilities are addressing and are prepared for cybersecurity. Also addressed previously is the need for Commission staff to have more staff. I'm up here and I have one other person at the Commission who is focused on cybersecurity. 2 people for the entire state of California is not a lot of people to do cybersecurity work. So those are pretty much the our two big issues that we're addressing right now, is how to do it with the limited staff that we have.
Obviously, our challenges are similar. A personal challenge is that I was hired under the ARA grant to work on smart grid and cybersecurity, and as Bill Huntman intimated earlier, or stated quite plainly, that stimulus funds will not be continued after 2012. So staff that was hired for smart grid issues pretty much have to get their arms around this kind of stuff and put things in place probably before the grant runs out. Otherwise, states will have to find a way to come up with more funds to keep us on board. And, you know, as everybody probably knows, states right now have shortfalls. Obviously, it's hard to come by people that understand smart grid or cybersecurity. And, you know, as is typical, government entities may have difficulty hiring from the private sector. So that's something else, another challenge that PUCs face.
Well, I'm not a regulator. Of course,
Do you play one on television?
Never. You know, I like to keep my friends. I represent electric utility co-ops, or I'm speaking on their behalf. I'm not an official representative, so all the disclaimers these guys had, just, you know, riff on those for a while. For the most part, my constituents, the companies I work with, have not been regulated. Most are not engaged in bulk power transmission. and they have always received sort of gentle treatment from state organizations. People haven't picked on the co-ops. Partly because we're liked, we have a good constituency, people think we're cute. Number two, there's the thought that if we screw up, it can't go too far, because it's, that second part, though, isn't quite true. The fastest growing utilities in the United States are, in fact, co-ops because they're in the areas surrounding the big cities. So we're actually doing an extraordinary amount of smart grid deployment in rapidly growing areas, and we're increasingly important. So it is inevitable at some point that regulatory agencies are going to pay attention to the smaller of us, because we are nonetheless doing important things. In listening to what Chris said, and Chris is a fellow I've heard speak a few times, and I kind of like the way he approaches things, the emphasis was on a strategy document that is framed and influenced and informed by various guidance documents from other people. And I like the idea of strategy. Thinking ahead is good, but it also says that people are encouraged, empowered, and required to think for themselves, to expand on the black and white of a regulation and develop something beyond that. And what I've learned and been pleased by in this conference is that there is a general understanding that security goes beyond compliance, that compliance should be an aspect of security and not the other way around. The emphasis on risk assessment is great. I mean, that is absolutely the starting point. So I like the California approach. Risk assessment leading to a strategy with the understanding that such strategy document should be revised, extended, and improved on a continuous basis. We know we're going to be regulated. I hope it is by regulators who recognize the complexity and breadth of the problem and its changing nature, and the role of the regulated in building plans that make sense. So.
I'm going to kind of do a little bit of play off of some of the things that you guys said. Chris, I know the answer to the question I'm about to ask you, but I think some of the other folks in the room might want to hear it. You mentioned that the audit plans don't have to be filed, but they have to be available for review. Why do they not have to be filed?
For the time being, we are contemplating the relevance of the regulator to require the documents be filed. Since we are just starting on this path of ensuring security, we didn't want to, I'll say, overburden RIUs as well as overburden staff with documents that we may or may not need. The idea is to allow the utilities to show us that they are taking security seriously so that we don't need to develop more strict measures on cybersecurity.
Okay, that actually wasn't the answer I was expecting, but that's all right.
Can I
What
give
was
an
the answer you
amen
were
to that?
expecting?
I'm sorry?
I want to give an amen to that, okay? The real audience for the audit is not the agency which required it, it's the organization that was audited. It's their instruction manual on how to make them better. With two guys, I mean, Chris is a smart guy, but there's only two of you out there. There's no way in hell you could comment intelligently on an audit from everybody who's being audited. You have the standing, the authority, the presence, and the gravity to require it. And that's probably the most important first step. Requiring it, yes, but make sure that it's the utilities who are reading it and using it, because they're the consumers of that information.
Well, I would also
so we're
like,
right on.
I would also like to give an amen for a slightly different reason.
Okay.
At many state PUCs, if it's filed, it's a public record.
That was, yes.
Well, yeah, in Texas, we have.
If
a
it's available for review, it isn't. So that's,
We have a confidential filing method.
yeah, some states do have a confidential filing process. Other states are,
Well, I mean, the issue of confidentiality goes to the larger part of how we plan to do cybersecurity, because you're right, the utilities are reluctant to give us, the commission, documentation on cybersecurity plans for their fear of it being discoverable. Now, we do have some confidentiality protections. Those generally last for 3 years, and they're mainly focused around market-sensitive data. we don't quite, as far as I'm aware, we don't have rules to protect security data. That may be something that we should investigate over the next year or two, whether or not the state of California needs to adopt a rule to protect
I think
critical infrastructure.
You're a lot likely to get some cooperation if you have one in place ahead of time. It's just like an NDA.
And let me address another sort of issue, or ask another issue here. To a great extent, the expertise that's required to do this is on the utility and vendor side. Having spent almost 30 years at a state PUC, I know there is a great deal of distrust of information coming from the utility and vendor side. How do you get around that? How do you deal with that? How do you deal with that inherent bias?
Well, again, in Texas, we have ERCOT. They're kind of intermediary between
Well, yeah.
the utilities and the commission. So we do lean on them for a lot of technical support.
Well, like the real world to an economist, Texas is a special case.
That's often said about California as well.
Right.
What's the root of the distrust? And why would they distrust? Why would commissions distrust security plans and information?
It's not so much distrusting security plans, at least in my experience.
Yeah.
It's that there's a general view of the utility as a litigant in an unpopular process. So there's a tendency to think that whatever the utility tells you, there's a reason for telling you that they aren't telling you.
How do I answer that one right? So,
I mean, the question that these folks, the answer that these folks need to hear is, how do you get past that? How does the utility, or how do the people in the security community help the PUCs over that hurdle?
so the biggest thing that would be useful to commissions, since we generally have the lack of funds to travel to the various and myriad conferences, would be to come talk to us. Help the commission ask the right questions, help us become informed to know whether or not what the utility is providing to us is useful, or if they're going the wrong way, or if they are on the right track. Get involved in our proceedings. Some of us, the proceedings may be very difficult to figure out, but they are very useful for us. Much like FERC, our decisions are based on the record. You can help us model the proceeding and have us ask the right questions, but that only goes so far in coming up with actual decisions.
Okay. Well, let me ask a little bit different angle on that. In terms of groups that are external to your organizations, who are you working with the most to get a better understanding of smart grid security?
In my case, it's a lot of self-education, Homeland Security, ICS CERT, ICS JWG. It's education, coming up to speed on that kind of stuff. Basically, I think Mike said this, of all the commissions in the state, in the country, I'm the only one he's aware of that has cybersecurity in the title. My role is to basically translate geek speak into regulator speak, to call BS when it's time to call BS. And, you know, again, I don't know everything, but I stay in tune with what's going on in NIST, Cybersecurity Working Group, and OpenSG, and keep track of what's going on in NERC. The way I see NERC's SIP standards is it's a bootstrap into security. What we're trying to do is turn the focus less on compliance and more on security. Less on checking the box and more in putting methodologies in place and an architecture in place and a framework and making things secure. The days of compliance and integrated, vertically integrated utilities and dinosaur thinking is coming to an end. So it's an education process.
And speaking on behalf of my colleague Wendy, who most of you probably are familiar with, that is pretty much what she's been doing. Self-research, calling into all the CSWG phone calls and all the other working groups going on under NIST that have the word cybersecurity on it. she's on it, she's calling in and listening to what everyone on the phone is saying, and then doing research based on what everyone else is telling her. That didn't
Oh, NISTR 7628, I think it's an amazing piece of work, very difficult to assimilate, but a phenomenally good first, second, or third effort. I don't know what generation it is. But the other thing is the fact that the problem's too big for any of us. One of the things I'm giving a master class on grid cybersecurity next week at Tech Advantage, and we're handing out some documents, and one of the things I did was I calculated the size of my security library, then NIST, and then our first guidance document and our other one, because we wanted to show progress by going down the track. I have more than 300,000 pages of references in this, and 600 in NISTR 7628, and now we're down to 145 in our guidance document. This problem's too big. I mean, every time I go to a conference here, I see something from a different perspective. I hear of different organizations. I hear of things that are being released this week, which really screws up people who are doing master classes next week. You know, I've got my assignment for Thursday night. I appreciate your colleagues trying to read it all, and when she gets it figured out, I'd like to hear from her.
Right, I think the first step to wisdom is admitting you don't know something.
Yeah, well, we've got to that stage, folks.
The second step is to get familiar with all the acronyms.
The best thing I've seen in the space is NIST 7628. That's what I read the most.
Well, that's because there's a lot of reading.
Well, yeah. We have a question. Did you notice?
Oh, yes, we do.